is CNN Breaking News.
Dramatic new developments in the mystery of Malaysia Flight 370 in the past 4 hours, and we continue our coverage of this developing story. I'm Natalie Allen. To our viewers around the world and the United States, thank you for joining us. Let's go first to Nick Robertson, who's exploring developments in Kuala Lumpur, and then we will talk about the search in the Indian Ocean and what they may be finding there. Nick, first to you and this unbelievable new information about the flight path of this 777.
Yeah, we have new information about the flight path. It connects the whole of the flight path, fills in some very important blanks. This information coming from a senior Malaysian government official. And what this official says is that after the Malaysian Airlines flight 370 took that left-hand turn, deviated from its path to Beijing, flew across Malaysia, the official now says that they know from looking at radar data from neighboring countries that the flight then skirted the radar airspace of Indonesia, flew around the north of Indonesia, didn't fly over Indonesia, flew around Indonesia before coming onto that southerly route predicted by the Inmarsat satellite data and handshakes that took the aircraft all the way down to the southern Indian Ocean. So what is significant here? It shows another turn of the aircraft. It shows the complete route, flying back across Malaysia, then going up and around the north of Indonesia before flying down way off the Indonesian coast to the southern Indian Ocean. And what this senior Malaysian government official tells us is that it gives the appearance that whoever was piloting this aircraft was trying to avoid detection, trying to avoid radar detection of Indonesian radars as it flew down and off the coast of Indonesia on that southern path. A significant development. We now know all of the route that this aircraft took, and we know again not just that one left turn, but we now know another turn the aircraft took, turning in a southerly direction after apparently intentionally flying around Indonesia. Natalie?
And Nick, have Malaysian authorities said how they've been able to figure that aspect out, that part of this puzzle?
Yeah, what they're saying is that they now have radar information from neighboring countries. Now they have that radar information from neighboring countries. They can put that together with what they have themselves, what they've also been provided by others in the investigation, and that has allowed them to see clearly the path that has been taken, skirting around Indonesia. And this, for the investigators, will be significant because they've been trying to ascertain from the outset, was that initial left turn by the aircraft, turning away from the flight path to Beijing, flying back across Indonesia, was that because of some mechanical mishap? Certainly now, the appearance is what they are saying implicit that someone was at the controls intentionally flying around Indonesia and making another significant turn in the path of the aircraft. Natalie?
And an aviation expert that I just spoke with said that kind of flying of this highly technologically advanced 777 would take a very, very skilled person at the controls, and does that not put the focus back on the pilots, Nick?
It certainly would seem to. We've known from Malaysian officials that they have said all along that they believe that whoever was at the controls of the aircraft knew very well how to control that aircraft, and that's been a significant thing that they've said all along. And now it would very much appear to point towards the people in the cockpit with the most knowledge of flying that aircraft, the captain and the first officer. Of course, the captain had a lot of experience in the aircraft. The first officer was just on his first unaccompanied, if you will, flight in a 777. This was his sixth flight in the cockpit as first officer. The previous 5 had been monitored as part of his build-up in that process. So we've heard from investigators that they've been looking at whether it's sabotage, whether or not it's hijacking, whether or not there's been a personal issue on the plane or a psychological issue. And certainly now, hearing from this senior Malaysian government source that there's an apparent effort to avoid avoid radar detection flying around Indonesia. It's really going to provide investigators a lot more insight about who could be responsible and potentially help them try to figure out what may have happened at the end of its flight path, if they have an idea that the intent here was to avoid detection in this whole flight path, Natalie.
Unreal, this news. And of course, after this turn, that put this airplane on a track to virtually nowhere. And I know that, Nick, just yesterday you pointed out they've been expanding the investigation and organizing it in a way to look at the different aspects of the operations and the cargo and the people on board. And they still, though, even though they've been looking for something with these pilots up until now, they just haven't gotten anything that it would explain any action on the pilots to do something like this.
They haven't. What they have been able to do, investigators, is what they've played the air traffic control conversations with the cockpit to friends and colleagues of the first officer and the captain, focusing on them. They want to know, essentially, the important bit of information: who made that last radio communication, the Goodnight Malaysian 370, because within 2 minutes of that communication, that's when the transponder data about the position of the aircraft was turned off. That's when the radio silence began. The implication being whoever was making that last radio message potentially was the one in control of the aircraft when it took the left turn, when it took this passage. But the investigators, having played this audio, these audio recordings to friends and colleagues, say they are unable at this stage still to be able to tell who it was making that last radio communication. We do know that the first officer would have been in control of making radio communications on the ground when the aircraft was pushing back from the stand, when it was taxiing. But in the air, of course, we're told that it could have been either the first officer or the captain. And once that information is ascertained, it will allow investigators to further focus on this flight path. It seems to have been an intentional flight path, flying to avoid radar detection, flying off, as you say, to almost nowhere in the middle of the southern Indian Ocean, Natalie.
And we know now that when you say investigators, are you talking about not just Malaysian investigators, but also UK, France, US, that, you know, all of the people who have come together to try to piece this together? Because there have been some analysts listening to what Malaysia has put out in the past month that have pulled back on believing them and questioning their credibility as they've made some missteps.
There's certainly been missteps, and perhaps in time Malaysian authorities will see some of those. One came yesterday. The Minister of Transport, who essentially has been the face of the investigation here for reporters and for the for everyone, really, said yesterday, or implied, that it was still, no one had been ruled out from the investigation. It took further clarification to have it reiterated that, in fact, the passengers had been ruled out from the investigation. The crew was still under the scrutiny of investigation. So it's things like that that are apparent missteps, perhaps in the heat of the moment, words not as clear as they could be, that has led to some of that criticism. But in terms of assisting the investigation, Inmarsat has been providing valuable information in terms of the location of where the aircraft may have come down. We understand from Malaysian officials that their international investigation now is aided by China, United States, United Kingdom, France, Australia, other countries. They say they've had full support of all the ASEAN countries, the sort of majority of Asian neighboring countries in this region, and a few others. That the help they've been getting is significant, but they are the ones leading this investigation, as they're mandated to do under international standards. They continue to lead it, and it's their investigators who really seem to have control over the vast majority of the information, at least as it pertains to how this all happened, perhaps less so about the whereabouts of the aircraft now, Natalie.
All right, another unbelievable aspect coming out about the flight of this plane, and we still don't know why. But Nick Robertson, thank you for bringing us that information. Again, Nick reporting that this plane apparently purposely avoided Indonesian radar after making these turns and going on a path south. And that's where we're going to take you now to look at the developments that we are learning from the area where we last had data from this airplane. Aaron McLaughlin joins us from out from Perth, Australia, and we certainly have had some amazing developments in the past 4 hours, Aaron, on these ships, picking up perhaps some underwater pings. What can you tell us?
That's right, Natalie. There have been significant developments in these search efforts, with authorities deploying more assets to the area of the Haishun 1 detections, with Angus Houston giving a press conference earlier today. He's the man responsible for leading this investigation at the Joint Agency Coordination Center. He said that this is the most promising lead that they've had so far. The Chinese vessel detecting not one but two separate acoustic events some 2 kilometers apart within a time frame of 24 hours. What makes that more significant is the location. Houston saying that a team of international experts has revised the area in which they think the plane went down based on new information that they've obtained about that Inmarsat satellite. They've revised that area southward, which Houston said is very close to where the Chinese vessel detected these acoustic events. Now, in response to that, authorities are deploying more assets to the area, including HMS Echo, which is a British vessel with high technology expected to reach there in the coming hours, in which it'll investigate and try to authenticate what the Chinese vessel was able to detect. Now, the Ocean Shield, which is an Australian vessel, which is about 24 hours journey away, detecting a third acoustic event. Authorities saying that that vessel will stay there to thoroughly investigate that occurrence. Houston saying that, this is raw data at this moment. It thoroughly needs to be looked at, thoroughly needs to be investigated, and that we're a long way off from being able to draw any conclusions from this information. Natalie?
And what's really remarkable about this possible breakthrough, and yes, we definitely want to emphasize this has not been verified, but it came in the 9th hour. It came when time was virtually up to be able to hear anything. So this is, if this is something, it couldn't have come at a better moment or at the most critical time.
That's right. It's less than a day until that battery life of the black box pinger was expected to begin to fade, begin to decline as they redeploy these assets to this area to try and authenticate what they're characterizing as an acoustic event. It is still possible, even past that 30-day mark, that they could still hear something. That 30-day mark doesn't automatically mean that the battery is going to shut off. It just simply means that that signal will begin to fade. So it is possible that they will have some more days to work with in trying to figure out what exactly is going on in that area. Natalie?
All right. Well, all ships steaming to that particular area. Aaron McLaughlin for us there in Perth. We thank you. So what we do know about this area is this is a very, very deep part of the ocean where they believe these pings are coming from. Pedram Javahiri joins me now because you've been looking at what kind of challenges that brings and the point that because of the depth, there really couldn't be anything else making noises.
Yeah, very, very unusual to see that. And, you would expect that in the frequency, Natalie, that 37.5 kilohertz, it is specifically designed to weed out any sort of false hope. But of course, we know our oceans, we only know about 5% of our oceans that have been explored. So it's 72% of our planet. So very little we know about the oceans. It could be something we have yet to come across. But at this point, it is the best lead, obviously, that we've had. And when you get down to these depths, you're talking about pitch black conditions. Water temperatures here, 2 to 3 degrees Celsius. That's just a hair above freezing, of course. Crushing as far as the pressure that is exerted here. In fact, the only life you would find typically invertebrates. You would expect sea cucumbers, sea urchins, giant squid that roam this region. And again, the frequency, we're going to have to really verify exactly what comes out of this. But the depths, and to put the scale in perspective for you, if you took the One World Trade Center in New York City, about 1,700 or so feet for the peak of the tower there, 541 meters. You would have to put 10 of these atop one another to be able to get down to the depth that we're covering here. Of course, the Eiffel Tower, you see the perspective there. You see where the Burj Khalifa is, all of them to scale compared to the depth that we're talking about across the Indian Ocean. But here's the perspective. 216 square thousand kilometers, roughly the size of Romania. That's the search zone, or about 83,000 square miles. That is, and that's the size of Utah. So when you go in for a closer perspective, the areas that we're talking about beneath the sea's surface out there, this is what you're looking at. Depths go as low as about 20,000 feet. Ping detection, there it is at 14,700 feet. Again, getting down towards really the lowest points of this portion of the Indian Ocean. So we know the officials there saying this is doable. It's certainly a possible ability to be able to find this. They have the technology to do so, but it is a very challenging setup just based on what we know and what we don't know about going down this low into the ocean, Natalie.
All right, well, we'll know more about all of this part of the ocean in the next couple of days as these ships head there to see what they have uncovered. Thanks, Pedram. Coming up right after this break, more on our top stories. We continue to follow these latest developments in the search for Malaysia Flight 370.